And it all starts with the individual before we can go on the outside of ourselves. And so I think people say, well, I want to change the world. I want to do this, this, and that. But it's not sustainable if you are not sustained within your own relationship with yourself and with your money. And when you sustain yourself and plant yourself, then everything else is overflow. And then you can do amazing long-term things, in your family and in your community because of your ability to evolve and grow through that relationship that is intricately both personal finance and personal growth.
I'm Casey Main, author, writer, and party girl turned spiritual junkie, and I'm dedicated to helping you better understand the most important and most complicated relationship you'll ever be in, the one you have with yourself. It's the only relationship that you're in for the entirety of your time here, and it affects every single aspect of your life. Yet it is the one most often overlooked. This podcast is here to help you explore that relationship, get to know yourself so you can accept yourself, heal yourself, and become a better version of yourself. So let's get to it. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Better You podcast. I am your host, Casey Main. Welcome to the show. Thank you all so much for being here. Whether you've been following around for a long time or if this is your first time checking out the show, then welcome to the party. I hope you love it so much that you stick around for a while. We've got a lot of great guests coming up, and then I'm about to go into major planning mode for 2021. I'm going to be more organized, more kind of intentional about like the different cadence of the episodes and make sure that I'm really hitting all different aspects of our relationship with ourselves. So mind, body, soul. I'm going to include a lot of like interesting stories that people have. I'm going to do more solo episodes. I'm probably going to include some more science stuff for the fellow science nerds out there. And so, yeah, we're just going to come at this from every single angle because that is the point of this podcast, which is to better understand ourselves and our relationship with ourselves, because that I just believe, and I have learned through my own life, like it just sets the tone for every other relationship in our life, as well as just how we interact with the world and circumstances and situations that, we're placed in. So to me, it's the most valuable relationship, which is why we are focusing on it. I am really excited to share this conversation. I have seriously been wanting to have this exact conversation on this podcast since I started it. And I actually did an interview with someone probably right around a year ago, hoping that the conversation would be like this one. And it wasn't. We just didn't get into the types of stuff that we talk about today, which is what I really wanted to cover. So I actually ended up never airing that episode. And it ended up being a good thing that I didn't, because today's guest was just like the perfect person to have this conversation with. She is, no pun intended, a wealth of knowledge and just so insightful and articulate. Like you guys will be able to tell, like this was a super easy interview for me. Like I didn't have to really even say much. Like I would just ask a question and then she just had really comprehensive, insightful answers. So, I mean, listening back to this one, I was like taking notes like a crazy person, because I'm like, this is just full of just so much valuable information. So I know I always say that I'm excited to share episodes, and I am, but this one is particularly satisfying because I've been wanting to have this conversation for a long time, and we finally did. All right, so a couple quick podcast announcements. Make sure that you get your vote in for your favorite episode of the podcast so far. So in December, I'm going to be airing like best of the podcast episodes while I take a break from doing new episodes, so that again, I can go into like planning and preparation and organization mode for 2021. So shoot me a message on Instagram, Facebook, email me at thebetteryoupodcast@gmail.com, comment on a post, whatever. Just let me know which episode has been your favorite, or even like your top 3. If you can't pick one, that's fine. But it'll help me understand which ones you guys have really enjoyed. And then I'll probably do a new intro for each episode, but we're going to rerun some of the favorite ones, because really, like, listening to these conversations once is helpful, but then when you go back and listen to them again, it's like you always get more out of them. So I'm excited to hear which episodes you guys really liked the most, and then we'll all re-listen to them and learn even more. All right, so next week, we talked to Sarah Schulting-Krantz, who has a new book coming out on healing through the power of nature. First of all, this is a really cool book. It's very interactive. It's like this great combination of high level, but also like practical exercises and tips on how to apply the things she talks about. And she just has an incredible story. I mean, you could easily say like it's a devastating story, but it's incredible how she's healed from it and grown from it, and really just used it to move her life in the direction that she actually always knew she wanted to take it in. So I'm not going to give away what her story is. You guys have to tune in next week to hear it, but it is a don't miss episode for sure. And then that's actually all the announcements I have for the podcast this week. I will ask, actually, if everyone can do me a quick favor. It will not take long, I promise. Just press pause real quick on whatever podcast platform you are listening on, and leave the podcast a rating and a review. Even just a short little review. It doesn't have to be like a long novel or anything. If whatever app you're listening on takes ratings and reviews, if you can just take a minute to do that, it just helps a lot with playing nice with the podcast algorithms and discoverability and growing the show and all that stuff. So take 2 seconds, press pause, go give like just a quick little rating. And then come back and join us. All right, so let's talk more about today's guest. Jacent Wamala was born in Uganda but raised in Las Vegas. She is a mental health professional, entrepreneur, and educator. She is the founder of Wealth and Wellness University, the ultimate online personal growth community focused on creating generational wealth, health, and wellness. After paying off over $90,000 in student loans and credit cards, she decided to focus on supporting her community by educating young people to tap into their potential. And in this episode, we discuss what financial therapy is and how she got into this work, how we all have a personal, intimate, and often complicated relationship with money that begins when we are very young, the problematic mindsets we tend to have towards money and how it impacts our personal finances, why personal finance is so interconnected with personal growth, the different ways an unhealthy relationship with money can show up in our lives, why it's so difficult for us to talk about money within all our relationships, how a lack of education and conversations about money growing up causes us to struggle as adults, the process of starting to work on your relationship with money to change your personal finances, how growth or a transformation in one area of your life can start you on a journey of growth and transformation in other areas of your life, and why women tend to have more insecurity and doubt when it comes to money. All right, so as usual, I will link in the show notes to the different resources and things we discuss, as well as all the places you can find her and her work. She mentions a couple books that were very helpful for her in her personal finance journey, so I'll definitely link to those in the show notes in case you guys want to check them out. All right, so that's it. We're going to go ahead and jump into this money conversation with Jacent.
Start with a little bit of just your backstory and kind of how you got into the work that you're in.
Yeah, I'm Jacent Wamala. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in Las Vegas. I'm an educator and an entrepreneur. So I have a private practice where I offer counseling and coaching, and it focuses heavily on working with women, most of them women of color, on things like anxiety, depression, trauma recovery and life transitions, because life is hard. And so I have built this practice to really just support women being able to better understand themselves and learn how to heal and grow individually in order to have more fulfilling lives, supports their wellness individually with their family, and able to impact their community and the world eventually. And so from that, my podcast was kind of born almost a year ago now, where I just wanted to be able to have a place that housed the information that I typically would chat with clients about. And so, amazingly, it has really grown and taken off in the last 10-ish months, where now we're approaching, 60,000 downloads. And so I didn't really know that it was something that was as needed as it seems to be. And I get people reaching
Mm-hmm.
out saying, wow, this information is so helpful. And so I'm glad to be able to use whatever platforms that I have to educate. I think that being able to share information is really necessary, and have conversations that we don't typically have in our homes and in school to really support our evolution of personal growth. And so I taught professionally at University of Nevada, Las Vegas for 5 years in the areas of personal growth and development, contemporary couples and families, multicultural issues and families, and training the clinicians in the program as well. And so, the education coupled with the clinical work has been really fun for me to do. And that has kind of evolved into, the entrepreneurial side, where, I show up on the internet to support motivated millennials in their personal growth and personal finance journeys. And so I personally paid off over $90,000 in student loan and credit card debt in 3 years before my 30th birthday. And the journey I started for myself, but I recognized that every single one of my clients, had brought up finances as an issue, except for one. In the thousands and thousands and thousands of hours of time that I've sat with clients, money was one of those things that constantly came up as a roadblock or a stressor. And so I saw it as something that I was dealing with for myself, but then started seeing the common thread as far as how it affects our community and gets in the way of people being able to access services for their wellness, because of a lot of different reasons. So it's kind of grown into its own thing at this point, where now I have launched Wealth and Wellness University, which is a course and a community coupled together. And, it's really cool to be able to see the community thrive. We actually just had, one of our weekly calls last night, and just everyone is able to talk about the things that they never had the chance to growing up, and things that they don't have anyone to discuss with now as adults, trying to figure out how to, effectively, efficiently adult successfully, and
Mm-hmm.
it's really fun and exciting to just use my experience, my knowledge to support as many people that are willing to listen and committed to their own growth and experience over time. And so, yeah, I love having the conversations, and I thank you for, creating and maintaining a platform where these conversations can happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I agree with you that at least for in my, I only know my own experience, and I wasn't exactly seeking out any kind of personal development or personal growth or self-love, self-help, whatever you want to call it. I was actually oddly against it, which I find just ironic now, because that's the work that I'm in, which is probably by design, by life's design. But I wasn't aware of resources like that when I was younger and growing up. And I know that that's changing, and it's becoming more part of the conversation with people at younger and younger ages, which I think is really important, because I think for a lot of us, we get to this certain point of adulthood, and then it's like, I don't really know how to do life. Like, I don't really know how to navigate life, both from like a psychological standpoint, but then also very much so, I think, in the financial world. And so I love that you represent both those camps. Like, I think that's a really interesting but relevant, but like rarely seen combination.
Definitely. I actually, didn't know that it was an actual thing until I started looking into it. And so there's so many different ways to work with people in the mental health field. And there is a an approach called financial therapy, which I never knew about until this year when I started Googling. I also didn't know that financial trauma was a thing until this year. And I started doing my research and Googling and understanding the connection of what I was seeing with clients, and that there were names and other people having these experiences for these common things going on. And so I don't think it's something that is talked about enough, or that enough people know about, but are dealing with and struggling with. Like, there are some things that are just universal, right? We all live in a construct in a society that money is something that we all have to deal with at some level. And we deal with the way that society tells us, and maybe pop culture and our own culture tells us that we should interact and believe money is either good or bad, or a tool, or something that we should, veer away from or be afraid of. And so I think that while money is about math, that it's about much more than that. It's very personal and intimate if you start talking to people about it, because it's so intricately tied to, some of the messages that we received about identity and work ethic and possibility and potential, or the lack thereof. And so being able to address the mental health, the psychological and behavioral aspects, because there are people that know logical, structured plans, like do this, do that, do this. And the plan is clear, but people have trouble executing it. And that's how I know that that's an indication that there's something going on psychologically getting in the way of their ability to execute. And so that's where I tell people I am not a financial advisor. I am a mental health professional. So what I do is focus on helping people understand what their limiting beliefs are, what their triggers and traumas are around money, and be able to address those so that they can be successful in implementing whatever plan they have for their success with their finances. And really, to me, your personal growth and your personal finance journey are intricately tied together. You can't be successful financially without growing personally. And so I don't think that is highlighted or said enough. And then we kind of walk in the world and show up not realizing that we're going to be stretched in this area.
Yes, I love this so much already, and I'm super excited to dive into it with you, because I think this was something I realized just probably within the last couple years, that we have a very complicated and, as you said, like intimate relationship with money. And I really think that, and I don't know where like it stems from, but I I think I see like money as, like, I see money as an evil. Like, it causes people to do bad things. People chase it and end up unhappy with life. Like, I view it as a negative. And I don't know where that comes from. I didn't even realize that was a mindset I had. But when I did realize it, I'm like, oh, that can't be good. Like, that's got to be creating some kind of, energetic block, or just some kind of block for me in a financial standpoint. So talk to us a little bit about like what are some of the different like problematic mindsets or relationships that we have with money. Like what are the most common ones that you see?
Yeah, most commonly seeing money as evil, but money is an inanimate object, right? It's pieces of paper with dead people's faces on them. And so we give an association, we give meaning to everything, right? Based on our experience, interaction, and association to that thing. So what happens is really early on in our lives, we watch people and we hear people and we experience ourselves ways of interacting with everything. But money is one of those things that maybe it was our parents, maybe it was family members, maybe it was stuff we saw on TV, maybe it was at school, maybe it was a combination of all of those things that we heard certain things, or we saw people handle things in a way that created this association for us. So sometimes it's not blatant and direct, sometimes it's covert and kind of flying under the radar that we create these beliefs, or that we pick up these beliefs about money. And what's troublesome about that is that when we don't reevaluate that relationship, what happens is exactly what you said is what happens. There's an energetic block placed in your ability to continue to grow and scale and evolve, because what we come from and where we are birthed out of is abundance. love,
Mm.
peace, prosperity. And that is our innate nature. But when we have a money block, that's going to permeate and bleed into other areas of our life. Because what we're saying is that if money is evil, because we've given it that association or that characteristic, even though it's an inanimate object, then I shouldn't want that evil thing. Or if I do, then I am in some way, shape, or form evil for wanting or aspiring or striving to be successful financially because of it. So then in our career, in our entrepreneurial journey, in our personal finances, we're going to be capped and we're going to self-sabotage in some way, shape, or form so that we don't now embody evil because we've associated money with evil. When money is an amplifier, it's a multiplier. So when you as a person have characteristics of evil, then you are going to do evil with the money. If someone has the characteristics of generosity, then they are going to be generous with money. And what happens is that we associate what people do with money to their identity. And in some ways that makes sense because it's an amplifier, but we have to separate who we are as individuals and our nature to what it would happen with us in context, in relationship with these pieces of paper. So I think being able to address it, because again, money is a resource. It's not the end all be all. It's what can be done with money that makes a difference. And now if someone wants to fund, I don't know, sending guns to, underserved neighborhoods, that's them and their experience and their decision on how they're going to utilize the resource and the tool. If someone wants to use money to send to a third world country to feed children or to build a school, that is them utilizing the tool and the resource in the way they best see fit. And so I think it's necessary to address, to become aware first, right? To become aware of what's going on with our relationship with money and then decide, okay, what do I want to do about this? Is it serving me or is it not serving me? If it's getting in my way, do I have choices or opportunities to evolve within that so that, to me personally, this is my biased way of seeing and thinking about things, that I am better able to position myself to serve my community on a grander scale by working through my own stuff. And it all starts with the individual before we can go on the outside of ourselves. And so I think people say, well, I want to change the world. I want to do this, this, and that. But it's not sustainable if you are not sustained within your own relationship with yourself and with your money. And when you sustain yourself and plant yourself, then everything else is overflow. And then you can do amazing long-term things, in your family and in your community because of your ability to evolve and grow through that relationship that is intricately both personal finance and personal growth.
I love that. I have goosebumps. I could not agree more. Like, we start to change the world. Like, it's got to start with changing ourselves, like total mantra of this podcast. Okay. So question, do we have to identify where we picked up the negative belief or the negative relationship or mindset with money? Like, is it part of the healing process to figure out where it came from, or is it enough to just know that it's there?
I would say yes and no. I had a professor who said that people have a tendency to change in one or a combination of three ways: through insight, right? Awareness or knowing, through behavior, and potentially through experience. And so for some people, it might be helpful to trace back and understand, where something came from. But oftentimes it's not just one thing. So that can make the I want to say contact tracing, right? The trace back challenging, because it may not be a singular event that happened that made me have this mindset. It was most likely a collaboration and a culmination of multiple tiny things that happen. When mom went to the grocery store, she would say little things when we were picking stuff up that made me feel like money is scarce. Or when I was on vacation, we would say, oh, well, we can't afford that thing. So it's probably a combination of multiple things that happened to create this mindset and mentality around money. So it might be helpful to do some tracing, but at the same time, right? Like if your leg is broken, do you have to know how it broke? Like you just need to you need to figure out how to heal it, you
Mm-hmm.
know?
Yeah.
And so to some extent, you can just know that this is what it is, like the situation is what it is, and then decide what you want to do in the moment moving forward to influence your future. And so I think that it could, but I don't think it's 100% necessary, because regardless, what is going to be done now to evolve and change with that moving forward. And each person is different. That's why it's necessary to have these conversations and talk to different people, have a mentor, have a coach, have a counselor, maybe all of them, so that
Mm-hmm.
you can understand what constellation of things is going to help you best evolve in that area.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense, because I think sometimes figuring out I guess the origin of things can almost help us believe that they can be changed, because now all of a sudden they seem not quite as like big and overwhelming, because we understand like how it came to be. Yet at the same time, um, like you said, sometimes just being aware, okay, well, it is what it is. Doesn't matter how it got this way, but like now I want to work to change it. So next question is, like, I'm thinking the obvious, I guess, proof or example that maybe you have an unhealthy relationship with money is like if you're struggling financially. But could you have a negative relationship with it even if you have a lot of money? Like, are there different ways that um, it shows up in our life other than like the obvious ones, like debt or struggling to pay bills, or that, like, kind of more the lacking of money?
Oh, yeah. On the other side of it, right? I think it was Jim Carrey that said, I wish everyone could become rich and famous so that they could see that it's not all it's cracked up to be, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And for those who are financially well off, they experience just some of the same issues that someone who isn't does, you know? And I think that that helps us to recognize and remember, again, money is an inanimate object. It's like a rock, except we look at rocks that are out in our yard as, not being valuable, but we look at rocks that are shiny, right? Gemstones and diamonds, and we have attached to that thing is valuable for some reason, but it's a rock,
Mm-hmm.
just like the
Yeah.
rock in front of your house is a rock. You know what I mean? And so being able to recognize that, again, money is an inanimate object, and our relationship with it and how we've watched people utilize it is what creates our association with it, makes a huge difference. So then those who are, financially well off maybe didn't have the experience growing up in a household where maybe people worked a certain amount of hours or their schedule was a certain way, and maybe they didn't get time and attention the way that they would have liked, or that, parents who used money to heal distance or wounds in divorce and separation. And so now, people have this association as money being bad or evil because it's used as something to buy someone else off. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think definitely on both ends of the spectrum that it's how we use money, it's our association with what it can do, and our inability to really understand, how to best allow it to serve us and our purpose without getting in the way of what actually matters. If this year has taught us nothing else, right? I feel like hopefully people have recognized that what truly matters at the end of the day, right, is one's health and
Mm-hmm.
one's relationships. Over and over, right? There is an economic, situation that we're having to deal with, but more than anything else, what are we hearing stories about and what are people concerned about is connection and not being able to connect. And then being concerned about their health, because we take it back to the basics. And those are the only two things that we have at the end of the day that really matters. So money is just on top of those other things.
Yes, totally agree. And I'm glad that you brought up relationships, because I was just thinking, like, so money is a lot of times a huge stressor within relationships. And I think it's one of those topics that in romantic relationships and marriages and partnerships, but also, among like family and stuff, like why is money so difficult to talk about?
Yeah, I think that because of generational patterns, I'll say, and the pressure put on people in different ways because of how things are handled, that it makes talking about finances troublesome because, again, it's tied to maybe not so good events, right? So people, let's say births, weddings, death. Right? Those are some major things that require funds, but are also highly emotional experiences. So people
Mhm.
oftentimes will go into debt for a wedding, right? And then they'll end up getting divorced, or they'll end up, they never had a foundation, a financial foundation or component to their relationship to address these things. So a year, 5 years into the relationship, they're fighting about money, but they never had the opportunity or the example of how to have these conversations. When someone dies, right? Because we don't have these difficult conversations around someone no longer being here, because either we think that if we talk about it, we're going to make it happen, which is not true. That we skip over doing what's challenging in the moment and force ourselves to have to adapt when the crap hits the fan, essentially. That, of course, while someone passes away or someone is on their deathbed, that now not only do we have to grieve, but we also have to address these logistical financial things that are really difficult if people have not properly planned or created an opportunity to make that experience easier. So I think generationally, because it's not something that's talked about in a lot of families, that it gets coupled with these really highly emotional events in life, which makes it like you don't want to talk about it, right? You're anticipating that it's
Mhm.
gonna suck. You're like, oh man, like it's gonna be another family fight. Like, here we go. And so then we brace ourselves for a blow before it even happens, and we don't sit down and slow down enough to be able to prepare and plan ahead because it feels uncomfortable or challenging in the moment, not realizing that it's going to be 10 times harder to deal with when you have no choice but to have
Yeah.
that conversation. And so, when I talked to someone, I think she was an estate planning lawyer or something like that, and she talked about what comes up for families, and she says she's a lawyer for life, for their life, as opposed to being seen as or doing work that's only focused on death. We're talking about, how are we passing down our legacy? How do we want
Mhm.
to ensure that, our family members are set up? And when we look at families that have been able to have these conversations and appropriately plan, that there is even in highly emotional situations where there's a divorce or there's a loss, that yes, the loss is significant, but with that financial piece taken out of the way, it's so much easier to deal with and manage than when those things aren't put in place. So I think because it gets coupled with highly emotional life experiences in a bad way, that we don't want to
Mhm.
talk about it. And it's uncomfortable. No one wants to do what's uncomfortable.
Yeah, well, that could be a whole podcast episode in itself. Um, so talk a little bit about our, like, kind of how we tie it to self-worth, because I think that's also a contributing factor of our, like, not wanting to talk about it or bring it up. And I think I experienced this even in my own life. And actually, it's funny, not long before, or not too far before we jumped on this podcast, somebody who owed me some money for work paid me, and it was short. And I went through this whole, like, mental kind of freak out of, oh wait, he didn't pay me the full amount. Oh, is this right? Actually, should I say anything? Maybe I'm not going to say anything because, like, he gives me a lot of work. And just, I went through this whole process, and then I eventually told myself, no, Casey, it's not a big deal. Like, he owes you a little bit more, just tell him. And I did, and he sent it, no problem. But it was like a mental exercise for me to go through that. And I just feel like it's something tied to self-worth.
Definitely. Again, because these are things that we don't talk about early and often, that essentially what's happening is you're having a growth spurt, or you're having your growth process as an adult in these experiences because you haven't had the opportunity to manage it before. If we think about, the other day I was at school watching a kid try to tie their shoes, and they're in first grade. As a 30-year-old, I'm like, you just tie your shoe like this, right? But that's because I had the ability to practice and learn and adapt in, elementary school. This 6-year-old, right, who's only learned how to tie their shoes in the last year, of course, is fumbling and struggling with the process of tying their shoes. But by the time they're in 5th grade, 10th grade, college, it will be something that's easy for them. So money is actually something that preferably, just like learning hygiene, just like, not every family is doing this, right? But learning how to manage relationships, or learning how to emotionally regulate. Money is something that we should be talking about early and often in age appropriate ways. So that way we're not forced to adapt as adults when these things come up. So what happens is now you're essentially, all of us, I always say, like, okay, like I was a kindergartner in my personal finance journey, figuring out what am I supposed to do? What's the process? What are the steps? And our adaptation is slower because it's new. And that's okay. And we have to give ourselves grace for the newness and the learning curve we have to experience, because we were never set up to be successful with these things. We were never told, how do we manage money with friendships? How do we talk to our friends about money? What does that look like? Are there examples of that? Have I watched anyone do it? Have I ever been given insight on how that looks? Have I ever been told how I'm supposed to talk about money with family members? What does that look like? Or how do I manage difficult situations when people are asking me for what I don't have? And when we tie it to our self-worth and say, oh, well, I'm 30, so I should know how to do this. But how, if you were never taught, if you never learned, right? And so I think is that we compare it to other things that we have mastered, when the other things we've mastered or that we're really good at, we had the time and attention placed on learning how to do that thing well. And then we expect ourselves to be able to do this other thing well that we did not have the same time and attention or support to learn how to do. And so, there's one module in my Wealth and Wellness course where we talk about limiting beliefs. And I just want to read some off, because it comes down to how we end up tying our self-worth to money. And so one of the beliefs is, if I spend money on something that breaks, I'm stupid. There's another one that says, if I have a little more than I need to get by, someone else has to go without, right? About there being this exchange between me and someone else. If I don't feel bad about past mistakes and afraid about the future, I will make the same mistakes again. If I were a smart woman, I would be able to support myself easily by now. And these all have nothing to do with the pieces of paper with dead people's faces on them. This all has to do with how we feel about ourselves in context with the money. And because we never were told otherwise or shown otherwise or given opportunities to understand that who we are as a person is not defined by our work ethic or production or output, but that we are as an individual whole with or without the money. And that money, having money and being able to attain it is something that ebbs and flows, that we get confused into thinking that if I'm doing well at work, then that means I'm a good person. Or if I'm doing bad at work, then that means I'm a bad person. If I have struggles with money, then that means I must be fill in the blank. And so we kind of default, unfortunately, to a lot of negative ideas about ourselves based on how well we're doing in certain realms. And that comes down to living in, to me, like a capitalist society. So if we live in a society that says, like, production is important, extroversion is important, the ability to, live the American dream is important, rugged individualism is really important, that when we feel like we're falling short, it may not even actually be true, but when we feel like the perceived notion that we're not doing well in a specific area is now a reflection on who we are as a person. And that, as we become aware of it, again, gives us the opportunity to say, okay, does this serve me now? Is it working or is it not working? And then what do I want to do about it now, moving forward?
Yeah, I kind of had like a little aha moment as you were talking about how we're not really given the opportunities to practice this and to learn it. And I think that's especially true. So I spent I spent all of my career up until 2 years ago in the corporate world. And so that's a little bit more set. If you apply for a job and there's like a set salary, and maybe you can negotiate a little bit, but you're pretty much told this is what this job pays. Then if you leave that and go out more into the entrepreneurial or freelance or more independent world, now it's on you to like set your own prices. And then it's like you're thrown into the fire of, okay, like put a monetary value on your skill set. And I think, as I sit here and try and give myself like a little bit more grace, I think that's probably why I'm such like a kindergartner trying to learn how to tie her shoes in this scenario, because it's like I never owned sneakers and then now that's all I have. And so every day I've got to put on shoes and tie them when I used to just always wear sandals and it was easy.
Yes, you put it perfectly, right? And for you to have been in the corporate world, it wasn't that you even went to elementary school and then went to the corporate world. How many years of schooling did you go through, right? To learn how to follow directions, to learn how to be detail oriented, to learn how to do assignments and turn them in on time, to learn how to manage your time, to learn how to manage personalities and other people that are around you, right? Through just being in class or in sports and things. So you spent literally probably like 20 years at least, right? Preparing for the corporate world in one way or the other, whether you knew it or not.
You're right. You're right. And you weren't paid for any of that.
Right. And you weren't paid for it. And there was an expectation to some extent, but a lot of it was pretty low stakes, right? And so what happens is that we expect ourselves as the kindergartner to tie our shoes like a 10th grader when that's not the case. And now, thankfully, right? Here's the kicker. When you've been able to accomplish or grow in a certain area, that means you have the capability to grow. And once you grow in one area, then you know yourself, or you can get to know yourself well enough to learn how to do it in another area of your life. And that's why I say this is also a personal growth journey, because if you've been able to get into the corporate world, then that means, of course, you can reevaluate your relationship with money and thrive and be really successful as an entrepreneur, because you can accelerate your growth actually as an entrepreneur by applying some of the same skills that you did and learned from the corporate world, from growing up, learning how to follow directions, learning how to take on challenges and allow yourself to evolve within that. Learning how to, manage your time, manage your impulses and self-regulate. And those are still principles that are across the board helpful for you in your relationships, in your personal finance, in your professional realm. And so what's nice is that it doesn't have to take 20 years. If it took 20 years to get into the corporate world successfully, it doesn't have to take 20 to do well in your personal finance. You can cut that time really quickly.
Okay, that is really good news. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about all right, so we're sitting here, people listening, they realize, okay, maybe I don't have a great relationship with money. What are some of the things that we should start to do to work on that relationship?
Yeah, I think that the first thing in any area of growth is awareness, right? So we hear a lot about awareness these days. That's because it's necessary. It's not something new, it's something from the dawn of time that we just need to continue to apply in as many places of our life as possible. So your ability to become aware of what you observe going on in your life and then deciding. So when I became aware that like my situation financially was not ideal for me, then I decided and I said, okay, what do I want to do about this? I can keep going down the path that I'm going, and here's the possible outcome. Or I can decide to try to do something different and see what happens. And so what I think gets people tripped up is that people want to become aware and see the action or have the feeling or have some sort of result before they want to commit themselves to a
Mm-hmm.
plan or a process, right? We want to wait to feel like it, or we want to see some kind of level of result to start. The thing is that it's backward. We need to decide first. And then in making a decision and committing ourselves, we will be able to create the momentum that will get us the results. And then the results become the motivation. So motivation isn't something that comes first. It's actually the result of something. And then that cycle feeds itself. So awareness, making a decision, acting in some, even a small way, toward what it is that you say and feel that you want. And finding support is really helpful and necessary. Again, like when you're in elementary school, no kid in elementary school do we expect to be able to do everything by themselves. Is that fair? Is that if there's a baby that's learning how to walk, are we just like, yeah, let's just leave them to their devices and they should be able to get it on their own, right? And when they fall, we don't say, oh, that baby's such a failure for falling on their butt, man, they really screwed everything up, No, we recognize that that is a part of the process, and we do not label it as something good or bad. We just know that it's a part of it. So it's the same exact thing in our personal finance journey. You will not be perfect. You're going to fall on your butt, and it's okay. You're going to have setbacks, and it's okay. You're not going to budget perfectly, and it's okay. And how can you allow yourself to transform your mindset so that you can attack whatever it is that you seek to accomplish with the same energy as a baby learning how to walk, or someone in elementary school learning how to read? And maybe it's a part of tapping into like our childlike nature, before we kind of got jaded, we
Yeah.
got scared, and then we let fear and doubt in, and then we let fear and doubt rule our lives, and then it keeps us from moving forward. And so maybe it's a little bit about returning to our innate nature.
Yeah, you are so right. This is so just all the same basic principles of personal development and just self-growth in all other areas of our life that we apply to in terms of our happiness and our relationships. We focus a lot on relationships, but then it's like there's money sitting over here like, hey, I could use some work too. And it's like the same process. So I love that, but then I'm also like, oh man, it is such a exercise of patience and just that like pushing through the uncomfortable phase of like the newness, the kid learning to tie the shoes. Like it's uncomfortable as an adult to do something you're not good at
Yep.
and to fail and get back up and all that. So it's like I can see the light at the end of the tunnel because I know I've grown in other areas of life, but I'm like, oh man, this is going to get uncomfortable.
Yeah, I mean, it's what's wild is that your transformation, or a person's transformation, is going to come, in one area, usually first, and then has the opportunity to affect the other areas of a person's life.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like, my greatest, actually, maybe there's many transformations as well, because there are things that I took on before I tackled my personal finance journey that helped me to be successful in my personal finance journey. So, but I think that was maybe one of the largest transformational places for me, that because it's affected my relationships, it's affected my business and the way that I work with people. And so for some people, their great transformation may come in the form of their physical health and well-being. And then they have the opportunity to allow that to bleed into the other areas: social, relational, emotional, financial. For me, it came through finances, and then it bled into my spiritual, my social, my So everyone has to be on the lookout for where their transformation is coming from, and then not miss the opportunity to let that thing affect the other areas of your life, so that you holistically have a sustainable way of continuing to grow and thrive within yourself over time.
Ah, yes, I love that. It's like your gateway transformation. It's like the one that
Exactly.
gets you going, and then it does like domino effect to others. Because I guess for me, it would be my relationship with myself, which then bled out into my relationships with others. And then now it would make sense that now it's moving more towards business and money because of the relationship I'm in. And he has absolutely no problem viewing money as like it's just a thing, just a piece of paper with dead people on it, as he would say. Like it's not, there's no emotions tied to it. Like it's very easy for him. And so that causes, it can cause uncomfortable conversations in the relationship because he doesn't understand like why I get so emotional about it. So it's just, it makes sense when I look at it that that would be like the next part of my like holistic journey, which actually brings up a question. Have you found like, is there an overall difference in the way men and women relate to money?
For sure. I think that, because of societal norms and generational patterns that we are given, right? These ways of seeing money and how we interact with it, right? We know that the majority of women don't ask for raises or negotiate raises or pay the same way in which men do. There's no way that someone can tell me that a man and a woman are, a woman is not as qualified or capable of doing what a man can do, right? So the
Mm-hmm.
potential is there across the board, but it's the belief about potential that gets in the way. And so the way that we socialize young boys and young girls and everyone in between is different, and that socialization affects one's confidence. So we seek to make confident young boys, and it's permeated through different areas. So if a boy falls down, what do we say to a boy that falls down?
Oh, you're okay. Get back up.
And what do we say to girls when they fall down?
It's more like allowing them to cry, like, oh my gosh, are you okay? Like there's more of a, I don't know, it's like they're allowed to feel.
Right. They're allowed to feel, but a seed of doubt is planted as well. So
Oh.
we are sure that a boy is okay when he falls down, and we make him sure and confident that he can overcome and manage whatever that thing is. I'm not saying that this is what we should be doing across the board. I'm just making an observation. What we do with girls is we ask a question. Are
Are
you
you
okay?
okay?
Which
Yeah.
then introduces the idea of not being okay. So then in the process, and that's just one area, right? The quickest thing that
Mhm.
comes to my mind. That then as we grow older, that boys, we don't ask them, right? We don't provide an opportunity for doubt for them in a lot of ways. So then a piece of what they get from that is confidence.
Mm.
They get arrogance to some level. And that can be helpful or that could be detrimental, right? We can leave that where it is. With girls,
Mhm.
as we grow older, then when we introduce, are you okay? What's going on? That can also introduce a lack of confidence because now they're questioning themselves. What happens when someone is trying to get a job? What happened when you needed to get the money from your friend? What did you do?
Well, I freaked out, but I did eventually ask. But you're right. I questioned:
You
does he really owe me?
question.
Did I do this right? Is this worth, saying anything? Maybe I should just let it go because, like, yeah, it was a bunch of doubts.
And if we don't have none of them, I'm not saying that we need to, completely change or do. What I'm saying is that we need to have conversations around why we approach these things differently and why we don't talk to kids about both sides of this and maybe help them understand but people aren't doing their own work enough to be able to have that conversation with a kid.
Yeah.
So this is why it's important to do your own work first. And it's a huge commitment. It's really tough. It's not easy, right? To do your
Hmm.
own work so that you are able to have these conversations consciously with other people and the young people around us, so that we understand the context in which we are getting information and feedback and how to apply it for our success and how to let go of it when it no longer serves us. Maybe that worked when we were in elementary school, but that doesn't mean it works now that we are 30. And
Hmm.
how do we have this process of reevaluation and understanding how to come up with a new plan and a new approach that serves us now? where when a woman is going into a job interview, how is it that she's able to tap into her confidence and say and know what her worth is and say confidently without question, that this is what I feel like I'm worth, and believe in abundance enough that if this isn't what it is, like if this doesn't work out, it's okay. The next thing that is coming is even better and more aligned for my purpose and my good. But we don't have these conversations incrementally, age appropriately over time, to that when we are 30, 40, 50, 60 years old, that it's already locked in, just like driving a car, riding a bike, swimming, brushing our teeth is locked in. We're forced to now be kindergartners as a 30, 40, 50, 60-year-old in that area. But again, thankfully, because we've mastered other areas of our lives, we can accelerate our growth and be able to pick up pretty quickly once we consciously apply some of these tools.
Okay, gotcha. So it's the end goal is really for us all to be able to see money as you described it in the very beginning of this conversation, of like, it's a piece of paper, we assign whether it's good or bad, like it's just an inanimate thing. It's just a tool, essentially. And we can get to that mindset really only by doing our own work. And maybe it doesn't even start in finances. Like maybe it starts in a different area. Maybe it's more, maybe it's physical, maybe it's relationships, maybe it's self-work, but it's kind of, it's one cog in like a bigger wheel of how we're showing up in this world. And chances are all of it needs like a little bit of work, but once you start somewhere, it'll affect the others.
Most definitely. Yeah. For me, my natural hair journey as a young Black woman, right? Like my natural hair journey was one of those areas that I focused and was able to create a certain amount of progress within. I had gained, I think it was like 25, 30 pounds in graduate school. And I had always been active and an athlete prior to that. And, in the process of, genetic privilege and just focusing and whatnot, I also was able to focus on my personal fitness and drop that weight back down to a healthy level for myself. And so those were the things that I did prior to my personal finance journey, right? Going to school, going to graduate school and finishing successfully and seeing myself as a successful person, regardless of if that just meant like, oh, I got out of bed today. Wonderful. That makes me a successful person. Oh, okay. Like I didn't skip work or whatever the case may be. Wonderful. And seeing yourself as successful so that you can see yourself successful in the things that are challenging in some way, shape, or form, at least seeing your capacity to be successful as possible for you.
Yes, I love that. Okay, I can't let you go without asking kind of a little bit more about how did you pay off so much money in such a short period of time? Like, did you have, I know you had some kind of like a plan, but like, can you share a little bit of like what you did?
Yeah. So real quick, I knew I never wanted to go into debt, but life happens. If you don't have a plan, then you default to society's plan for you. And that's what happened to me. So I accumulated the majority of my debt in graduate school. I ended up losing my father and getting divorced in the same year, 2014. And it led to, dealing with a lot of grief and loss. So 2016, we fast forward and my cousin gave me this book called The Smart Money Woman for Christmas. So January after the holidays, I started reading it, and it's about this Nigerian woman and her personal finance journey. And it was so charismatic and it resonated with me as a first generation person. And in the book, one of the chapters tells you to calculate your net worth. And I understood net worth as like, Beyonce has a net worth. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Jeff Bezos,
like we don't have net worth.
Right. I didn't attach myself to having one of those things. So, when I calculated it, and all of our accounts typically are so spread apart that we don't see the number altogether, that when I calculated my net worth and it was negative $70,000 from my rough calculation at that time, January 2017, that was a rude awakening for me. Like, oh, how did we get here? Like, what is going on? And so that's when I was given awareness, right? Like I said, is the first thing, the opportunity to decide. And I decided I do not want to continue down this path. I want to be debt free from the purest desire in my heart, right? Coming from love, joy, peace, and prosperity, which is our nature. And then I said to myself, when would it be cool to be debt free by? And I was like, oh, it'd be kind of cool to be debt free by the time I'm 30, you know? And that just comes from like love and joy and whatever. And so then I worked backwards. I calculated out how much I would need to pay off a month in order to hit that goal. I actually only made like $17,800 the year of 2016. So I was not making enough money to hit that goal at the time. My friend let me borrow Total Money Makeover by Dave Ramsey because I had seen him in person before years and years and years prior, but I didn't apply any of the principles. And so then the plan, again, there are multiple plans for personal finance that are very clear and laid out, but it's about being able to address yourself and your ability to commit yourself to a plan. But I had committed myself to plans previously, so I knew I was capable of making it happen if I committed to consistent action. So I started my job hunt probably, I think I started before I started my debt free journey. I never budgeted a month in my entire life. Since March 2017, I have budgeted every single month, a unique budget every single month since March 2017. May 2017, I started looking for a job, started selling everything in my house to save my first $1,000. That was the first time I think I ever had $1,000 to my name that I wasn't kind of like spent at some point. So that was my initial emergency fund because I did the 7 baby steps. And then I, started getting really serious about figuring out how I was going to get my budget to where I cut it down as much as I could and increase my income as much as I possibly could. So I started looking for work, found a job, by the end of the summer and started in the fall. And by that time, because I kept the other things I was doing previous to that, I tripled my income. So I lived on way less than I needed to, and I paid off as much as I possibly could. And to be honest, like it does require a lot of dedication and commitment. And every day I had to journal, I had to pray, I had to meditate. I did not necessarily enjoy the job that I had acquired because it was quite stressful. So I would write in my journal, I'm grateful to use my skills to support my community. And when I would write that down, as opposed to just going to work raw and not fortified, my day would go differently than when I would journal and meditate and listen to books and listen to motivational videos. It's a full-time job. We don't live in a society that is conducive to wellness, and we have to recognize that. And we have to induce the wellness that we seek to have in our lives. And so I made it my full-time job to, as much as I possibly could, be well at that time. So that fast forward, now that I'm debt free and I hit that goal a little bit early before my birthday, that during a pandemic that I didn't realize how much foresight will lead to your success financially, in every way, that during a pandemic, I'm actually doing better than I've ever done in my entire life because of decisions and committed consistency that I chose 3 years ago. And so I think that if we all kind of take a step back and act like adults, right? Like there's a lot of us in adult bodies, but we're not acting like adults because we're doing what feels good as opposed to doing what is best for us. And we have to parent ourselves as adults. I think we think that that ends when we become 18 or whenever we become adults, that, oh, no one else has to tell me what to do. I don't have to do. No, you are now the person taking the baton to tell yourself to go to bed at an appropriate time, to tell yourself to go to work, to tell yourself to do all the things that we don't like that is for our good. So I think that that realization came from me, and just really my why being very clear, and that I wanted to honor the sacrifices I know that people before me have made, and to leave a legacy beyond, mediocre of what they gave me the opportunity to do. And I want to do more and better than they did for me, for my nieces at the time. And now I have a bonus daughter and teaching her about these principles. And so, I think it takes an intense commitment to yourself, which is not easy. Get a team, get support, but it's possible. It's possible for anybody.
Oh man, you are just like the epitome of all things personal development. Like seriously, like inspiring. You've got me like re-energized to get back on the ball with some of my relationship with self-work, because you're right. It takes dedication, like consistent dedication, because it's easy to have certain practices, whether it be journaling or meditating, as part of our lives when life allows them. And then things change and life happens and things get hard or things get stressful or whatever. And we sometimes can let those things go by the wayside. But to stick to them and to tie them, consistently tie them back to a bigger purpose, really helps with that drive. And I mean, I love everything that you say. I love your work and what you're doing and what you've proven is already possible. Like, I think it's absolutely amazing. So thank you so much for coming on. Tell everyone where they can follow you, find your podcast, find the Wealth and Wellness University, just everything that you're doing.
Thank you so much for, again, creating the space and maintaining the ability for these conversations to occur. I appreciate you so much for thriving in your area to make that happen. I'm most active on Instagram, and that's at Jacent's Gems, JACENTS GEMS, Jacent's Gems. That's also the name of the podcast, which you can find wherever podcasts are listened to, Apple, Spotify, all that fun stuff. And leave me a DM, drop a comment or something to me. My internet space is like my house. You wouldn't come to my house and not knock on the door and say hi. So don't come up with my internet space and not say hi. I'll probably check you first and say, hello, how's it going? But if I don't,
that's right. You did do that. Like when I first started following you, you then like message was like, hello. And I'm like, oh, how lovely is that?
Yeah, because this is our internet space. I think it's interesting how social media is so disconnected. You know what I mean? That we like follow people, and people follow us that we never actually talk to. And so I just treat it, as an in-person relationship, in that when I meet someone, when that means a follow or a comment or something, that I introduce myself and I ask them to introduce themselves, and I just treat my internet space that way, and I find it to be more fulfilling and satisfying and sustainable for me, but also to create genuine connections with all of my internet friends. So I want to be internet friends with you. Come say hey, and I appreciate you again for providing this opportunity.
Yes, I love that. Our internet space is a home, and if you're not knocking on the door, then you're just being creepy looking through the windows. So
Exactly.
Don't be creepy. Awesome. Thank you so much.
All right, that'll do it for this week's episode. Thank you again so much for listening. I hope you all enjoyed this conversation. Next week is another incredible conversation, so make sure you are subscribed to the podcast so you don't miss it. Also, get your votes in for your favorite episode so far so that I can have my best of episodes air in December. And if you haven't already left a rating and review for the podcast, I would really appreciate it if you could take 2 seconds and do that. And then also follow us on social media. We are on Facebook and Instagram at The Better You Podcast. All right, so that is it. Thank you again. Enjoy your day and the rest of your week.